Tae-soo, a 23-year-old guy who recently returned to university, was pretty popular among students, but not for the reason you might think. The thing was, he was the best at helping others cheat their attendance records. So when two new girls approached him, they were all smiles asking for his help. The moment he heard their request, he handed them a piece of paper. His price list. Attendance for one class, 10,000 won. Homework, 100,000 won. Exams? Not available, that's illegal. The girls looked confused. They stared at the list and said they thought he was doing it for free. But Tae-soo, whose life motto was, "Nothing in this world comes for free," simply replied that he charged 10,000 won per class attendance. Then he added that since it was their first time, he'd give them a small discount. The girls were satisfied with the deal and thrilled they wouldn't have to sit through boring lectures, waved goodbye. Right then, Tae-soo's friends showed up behind him, amazed at his business mindset. They joked, asking if they could get his help too. He handed them the same paper and said flatly, "No discounts for friends." Soon after, Tae-soo was sitting in a lecture hall, answering roll call on behalf of the girls who paid him. He rented a small studio near campus, 500,000 won a month. Even with a thrifty lifestyle, he needed at least another 500,000 won for living expenses. When the professor finished attendance, he thanked everyone for being there. And just like that, Tae-soo vanished. The moment class ended, he was gone. His friends wondered why he always disappeared so fast. Maybe he had a girlfriend? Then they burst out laughing. "No way," one said. "That guy's so obsessed with money, he'll never date anyone. If he ever does, I'll dance naked and post it online." Meanwhile, Tae-soo was literally sprinting to one of his part-time jobs. To survive, he needed to make at least $1 million won a month. For students who couldn't rely on family support, every second counted. So he worked at a gas station and also tutored elementary school kids. In the evenings, he delivered food. He believed every minute spent working was an investment in survival. But the time he loved most was gaming time. He checked the clock. Classes started at 11 a.m., so if he played until 7, he'd still get 4 hours of sleep. Perfect. In the game, Tae-soo farmed gold by slaying monsters, then sold it later for real money. So gaming wasn't just fun. It was another source of income without any physical effort. On his server, he was pretty famous, known as the gold farmer who rarely spent a dime but somehow always made a profit. Then out of nowhere, another player appeared, trash-talking him, even insulting his parents. Tae-soo ignored the troll and finished off the monster he was fighting. But the stranger wouldn't stop, spamming the chat with insults. Eventually, things escalated and ended up at the police station. A young woman was shouting that she wasn't guilty, that she'd only defended herself, and that she was the one being scolded unfairly. Just then, Tae-soo walked into the station and froze when he heard her voice. The officer looked up, greeted him, and said, "That's the girl who was playing the character and insulting you online." The girl turned around, long black hair, striking features. Their eyes met, and both froze in disbelief. Chan Mie suddenly burst out laughing, pointing at him, saying, "You've got to be kidding me." The confused officer asked, "Wait, you two know each other?" The girl smirked, wrapped an arm around Tae-soo, and said, "Actually, he used to be my boyfriend." And it was true. 5 years ago, they had dated. They went to the same high school, same class. Mia had always been quiet and unnoticeable, sitting in the back corner reading books. But Tae-soo liked her. They often met up for dates in the library. She was the kind of quiet girl you could find anywhere, was nothing flashy. But now he barely had any fond memories left. What he remembered clearly was September 27th, during their second year. That was the day they broke up. She'd disappeared overnight. Her entire family moved away without a word. Now, 5 years later, watching her walk away, Tae-soo remembered that they were supposed to meet that day. Why hadn't she said anything back then? Should he ask her now? But suddenly, Miyato turned around angrily and snapped, saying it was unbelievable. After all these years, he had the nerve to demand 100,000 won from her as compensation. Tae-soo realized this probably wasn't the right moment to ask about the past. More importantly, was this really the same girl he used to know? At first, he thought maybe she just had the same name. But no, it was her. How could someone change so much in just a few years? Then he remembered his classmates from the reunion. They'd changed a lot too. Maybe it wasn't so strange after all. Still, the difference was staggering. Suddenly, Mia stopped, spun around, and snapped, "Why the hell are you following me? Feeling guilty now?" Demanding 100,000 won for a few online insults, that's insane. she said. She expected him to apologize, but Taisu just replied calmly that he was heading home, in the same direction. Mia huffed and said she might forgive his insults, but not his terrible manners. Then she added that he was lucky she was letting it go, and he should be thankful. Taesu stayed cool and replied, I already dropped the fine from 100,000 to 10,000 won. Unless you'd like to go back to the station? Then Mia decided to turn on all her charm. She widened her eyes and said sweetly that she didn't even have 10,000 won right now. Maybe Appa could forgive me this once? She asked. But Taisu wasn't having it. He shut her attempt down immediately, saying he needed the money, so no, he wasn't giving up his compensation. The girl sighed and said he'd always come from a good family and had a talent for numbers, so she wasn't surprised he'd end up rich one day. But suddenly, Taisu interrupted her and asked how she'd been all this time. Mia blinked, startled. He'd never cared about other people's lives before. So she just waved him off, smiled faintly, and said there was nothing worth telling anyway. As she turned to leave, she said they probably wouldn't see each other again, so there was no point in starting to talk again. She'd just pay him the compensation, and that would be it. With a confident smile, she added that they shouldn't meddle in each other's lives. Better to pretend they didn't even exist to one another. Then she waved and walked away. Those were the only words Taesu heard from his ex-girlfriend, after 5 long years apart. He couldn't believe it. Was that really all she had to say? She had disappeared overnight back then. Didn't he at least have the right to be angry? It wasn't about the money. He just wanted a reason to make her stay and talk for a bit. But maybe that was fate. He told himself they probably wouldn't see each other again, that this was really the end. Except, 1 month later, fate had other plans. Both of them were shocked by another unexpected meeting. Maya blushed, completely stunned. Was she really running into her ex again? One sunny morning, a moving truck stopped in front of the house where Taesu lived. Apparently, a new tenant was moving in. Taesu was curious, since the building was in a great location near the university, and the rent was very affordable. Anyone who managed to grab a place here, especially 4 days after classes had already started, basically found an S-rank treasure. Thinking about it, since Mia was now studying at the same university, he wondered, how far did she live? He remembered the first day of classes and his confusion. He still couldn't believe they were going to the same school again. Staring straight at her, he asked, "What are you doing here?" Mia looked at him like he was some kind of creepy monster. "What are you doing here? Are you stalking me?" She even grabbed her phone, ready to call the police. But Taisu lightly tapped her on the head and told her to stop talking nonsense. Then he showed her his student ID, proving he was enrolled in the Department of Media Communications. Mia's eyes went wide. "Wait, you're majoring in media communications too?" "I'm in class 25. Taisu nodded. "So that means we're in the same department." "You're my junior now." She smirked and said that didn't mean anything. Just like she'd told him before, they should pretend not to know each other. Then, mockingly, she added, "Got it, Sunbae?" Taisu silently watched her walk away, wondering why she was acting like that. Why she seemed so angry at him, as if they never had a past. Shaking his head, he told himself to stop thinking about her. Mia was just part of his past, and there was no way his new neighbor could actually be her. A little later, there was a knock on his door. He opened it to see who it was. Standing there was Mia, smiling sweetly and holding a plate of rice cake. She said she was his new neighbor and wanted to introduce herself. But the moment she saw his face, she froze, completely shocked that her new neighbor was Han Taisu. The next second, she shoved the plate of rice cake right into his face. She was convinced he really was a stalker following her around. But Taisu calmly wiped the rice cake off his face and said that if anyone was the stalker here, it was her. He had moved in first and wasn't planning to move out. Hearing that, Mia frowned and said she was sorry to hear he didn't want to change apartments. She silently cursed herself for being so impulsive, signing the lease just because the place was close to campus and cheap. Then she took a breath, smiled again, and said that, as she'd mentioned before, Taisu should just act like they were strangers. She called him Mr. Neighbor. Taisu nodded and replied, "Sure thing, ma'am." Hearing that, Mia grabbed a fire extinguisher and glared at him. "What did you just call me?" Taisu quickly shut the door, shouting that she started it by calling him Mr. But Mia yelled back that they were the same age. He was only a little older, so he should look her in the eyes and call her ma'am properly. The girl he'd dated 5 years ago, the one who used to sit quietly in the library with a book in her hands, was now his completely unhinged neighbor. Back then, sitting beside her while she read had been his favorite part of the day. Now, he chewed on a piece of rice cake, wondering what had happened to her over the years. What could have made her look at him with so much hostility? He couldn't remember doing anything wrong. The only thing he recalled was that she'd promised to meet him and never showed up. A little later, the intercom rang. Reluctantly, he went to answer it. To his surprise, the screen showed Mia, her head hanging low. When he opened the door, he decided to keep up their teasing banter. "What's wrong, lady from room 302? Weren't we supposed to pretend we don't exist?" But when Mia, almost in tears, asked if he could check her pipes, Taesu opened the door wider, only to see the entire hallway flooded. He quickly turned off the water valve and told her the pipes had burst from the cold. She'd have to call the landlord. Mia had already tried, but no one was answering. Once again, she regretted ever renting that apartment. Taesu stayed quiet, just watching her carefully. Suddenly, he remembered how Mie was always shivering from the cold. But now she was standing there, completely soaked through. The girl suddenly froze and snapped, "What the hell are you staring at?" Then she realized her clothes were drenched and her sweater was clinging tightly to her body, probably giving the guy quite a view. With fake outrage, she asked, "Seriously? You're thinking about that in a situation like this?" Taesu jumped up, cheeks burning, protesting that it wasn't like that at all. He wanted to say he was just worried about her, but he knew Mie would never believe him. So instead, he grabbed her hoodie and told her she needed to come to his apartment and dry off before she caught a cold. But the girl got angry again and accused him of having hidden motives. Why should she go to his place when she could just go home? She decided to head back and said she didn't need his help anymore, asking him not to bother her. But Taesu, keeping a straight face, asked if she was sure, because once the water was shut off, the boiler would be too. Mie refused to back down and, chattering from the cold, said she was fine. The guy sighed, called her stubborn, and then said flatly, "All right, 1,001 an hour." Mie blinked, not understanding, and blushed furiously. "What the hell are you talking about?" Taesu calmly replied that if she paid him 1,001 to warm up in his apartment, then it wouldn't count as him doing her a favor. The girl pouted, crossed her arms, and turned away. Seeing her hesitation, the guy added that it wasn't that expensive as a ktaum. But if she didn't want to, he wouldn't insist. Mie turned back, raised her finger, and said she agreed. But she had one more condition. A little later, Taesu stood awkwardly in the hallway by his door, wondering if he'd made the right choice. He only meant to let her warm up until her landlord showed up. But Mie had offered another 3,001 to take a shower in his bathroom. Honestly, he couldn't figure her out. One moment she was defensive, the next she completely let her guard down. As he stood there, he couldn't shake the weird feeling that he'd forgotten something important, but couldn't remember what. And then, as if on cue, the problem solved itself. His friends showed up with drinks and snacks, saying they came early because they heard his apartment had flooded and wanted to help. They laughed and teased, asking why he was standing in the cold hallway. Did he miss them that much? Then they mentioned that Ha-yoon told them his place had flooded and that she'd been really worried about him. But it turned out the flood was actually in the neighbor's apartment. Meanwhile, Mie was enjoying a warm shower, changing clothes, and relaxing in the cozy atmosphere. Taesu, on the other hand, was panicking. If his buddies found out there was a girl from next door in his apartment, they'd never stop teasing him. So he quickly came up with an excuse. He'd invite them to grab drinks somewhere else since his place was a mess after the flood. He even said he'd pay. His friends were shocked. Taesu, the guy who never spent an extra cent, was offering to treat them? They asked if he'd hit his head. They started patting him down, saying maybe they should take him to the hospital. Annoyed, he snapped, asking if they were in or not. His friends lit up with joy, laughing that they'd better say yes. After all, this might never happen again. Taesu thought things were finally under control and told them to go downstairs and wait while he got ready. But as fate would have it, just as the guys were turning to leave, the door swung open, and Mie stepped out, announcing loudly that she'd finished her shower. The girl spotted his friends and asked, "Who are they?" The guys froze, then shouted in unison, demanding to know what was going on. Why was there a girl taking a shower in Taesu's apartment? They started shaking him, asking who she was and how he'd managed to charm such a beauty. Barely escaping their grip, Taesu rushed to Mie and blurted out that she was his little sister. Outraged, the girl yelled. She had no idea what was even happening anymore. But his friends didn't buy it. How could such a cute, pretty girl possibly share genes with someone like Taesu? Mie kept protesting until Taesu leaned in and whispered that she should play along, unless she wanted their classmates to start spreading rumors. Then she got it. They were all from the same department. So she flashed a sweet smile and said she was his little sister after all. Suddenly, there was a loud thud, and the wall cracked. Na Hyun appeared, fists clenched, glaring at them and demanding if that was true, and if so, why she'd never heard of any sister before. She looked small and delicate, smiling sweetly as she said she'd known Appa for 10 years. So how come she'd never heard a word about a sister? The next day at the university, Taesu explained everything to Hyun privately. Hyun was 21 and had secretly been in love with him for 10 years. So now, she needed to make absolutely sure nothing was going on between him and Mie. Satisfied that no one was competing for her crush, she walked ahead, humming happily. Taesu had known Hyun since childhood. They grew up in the same town. She was the youngest in a family that owned a big taekwondo studio. Even though she was short, she had a natural talent for martial arts. She'd become a local legend by the time she was in 6th grade. The locals even gave her a nickname, the Crazy Chihuahua. Despite what Taesu told her, Hyun couldn't help but worry about Mie's return. She knew the two of them had dated once. She was shocked by how much Mie had changed, especially her looks. Even though it was definitely her, it felt like she'd become a completely different person. But what bothered Hyun most was why Mie had suddenly come back. Taesu had been through a lot because of her. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by Jung Hee-soo, the student council president and Taesu's senior. She thanked them for coming to help even though they weren't part of the council. Hyun was happy to assist. She actually enjoyed carrying heavy things. Hee-soo asked Taesu if he was doing okay and whether helping her wouldn't interfere with his part-time jobs. But Taesu beamed and said he'd actually taken days off from all his jobs just to help her out. Hyun grew wary. Had he really gone that far for her? It was obvious he liked Hee-soo. Everything about his expression and body language screamed that he was happy just to be around her. Watching that, Hyun puffed up her cheeks in silent jealousy, thinking to herself that he only acted that way around Jung Hee-soo. And she was right. That was Taesu's secret. The person he liked was Jung Hee-soo, a senior 1 year above him in the same department. But apparently, it wasn't much of a secret to his friends. They teased him, asking if this was the same guy who swore he never worked for free, and now he was hauling heavy boxes and even joining a club trip when he wasn't part of the club. Young-sik smirked and said Taesu could pretend all he wanted, but everyone knew it was because of Hee-soo. The guys kept teasing him, joking that the freshman girls this year were gorgeous, impossible to take your eyes off them. But without a doubt, the prettiest one was his little sister. Young-sik even said he was sure she'd become his wife someday. Taesu couldn't care less about their nonsense. He just kept working quietly. Meanwhile, Ha-yoon grabbed the guys by the collars and made them pay attention to her. She smiled, though a vein pulsed on her temple, and told them to quit slacking and get back to work. When they finally finished, Hee-soo thanked everyone and told them what time to meet at the main gate. Then she walked over to Taesu and Ha-yoon, giving them a sweet smile as she thanked them personally for helping out even though they weren't in the student council. She looked stunning, and said that after the trip she'd buy them drinks as thanks so they'd better not miss it. Taesu immediately declared that he'd come running even if he got hit by a car on the way. Later, when he got home, he paused in front of his apartment door, thinking that he'd be lying if he said his heart didn't flutter a little at Mie's return. But even if she was back, it didn't change the fact that he liked Jung Hee-soo now. Just then, he saw Mie coming home with a bag full of food. He asked if she knew she'd gain weight eating like that. The girl blushed and yelled that she'd eat whatever she wanted. Why, it was none of his business. Then she added that the snacks were actually for everyone on the trip tomorrow. But Taesu casually told her that they'd already bought everything using the group funds. She didn't have to bring anything. That wasn't what upset Mie, though. What shocked her was realizing he was going too. She begged him not to ruin her first MT trip, reminding him that she was a freshman and he'd already been to plenty of those. Taking advantage of the moment, Taesu stepped closer and asked what exactly about him bothered her so much. What had he done wrong? Wasn't she the one who messed up between them? Hearing that, the girl froze. She couldn't answer. He reached toward her, asking her to tell him why she was angry, but Mie suddenly slapped his hand away. She quickly put distance between them and said he was right. She was the one at fault, and that's exactly why she wanted them to act like strangers. Then she rushed into her apartment, not giving him a chance to respond. On the day of the trip, Hee-soo approached Taesu and Mie. explaining that since some students decided to join last minute, there weren't enough seats on the bus. The two of them would have to ride with her in her car. They both looked stunned, but knew they had no choice. Why did situations like this keep happening to them? Everything went as planned. The bus headed toward the rented lodge. No matter how hard Ha-yoon tried, she couldn't spot where Tae-soo was sitting. Her friend teased her, asking if she was nervous because she couldn't see her husband. Blushing, Ha-yoon jumped up, yelling that she and Tae-soo were just friends. But her friend only smirked and said he was riding in a car with Hee-soo. Then came the final blow. She found out that freshman Chan Mi-ae was riding with them too. Meanwhile, Hee-soo started the car and cheerfully asked if everyone had everything they needed. Mi-ae said yes, but felt awkward sitting in the back seat with Tae-soo. He looked ridiculous, wearing a motorcycle helmet and hugging a pillow. She thought he'd lost his mind and asked what the heck he was doing. The guy handed her another helmet and said she should put it on too. Since they were in Hee-soo's car, it was a must. Before she could ask what he meant, the car took off, like a rocket. When they finally stopped for a break, Mi-ae barely made it to the nearest bench and collapsed onto it. She felt like she'd barely survived that hellish ride. Suddenly, Tae-soo leaned over her, offering a drink, saying, "Now you know why no one ever agrees to ride with Hee-soo. She drives like a Formula One racer." Suddenly, Tae-soo leaned over her, offering a drink, saying, "Now you know why no one ever agrees to ride with Hee-soo. She drives like a Formula One racer." But the girl refused and told him to thank Hee-soo for her. She didn't like coffee. That surprised Tae-soo, since he clearly remembered Mi-ae drinking coffee all the time back in school. He even tried reminding her how they used to sit in the park together drinking coffee, but she cut him off, saying he must have confused her with someone else. Then she stood up and said she didn't feel like digging through old memories. She asked him again to just pretend they were strangers. He, of all people, knew how hard those days had been for her. And now, seeing him again, all those memories came flooding back, driving her crazy. It just so happened that after all these years, they'd met again, studying at the same university, living next door. She asked him to act like they'd never known each other and apologized for all the harsh things she'd said before. It was the clearest and most polite rejection Tae-soo had ever received. The Mi-ae he once knew no longer existed. But then, why did she say she remembered him? Why not just pretend she didn't? Suddenly, Tae-soo's thoughts were interrupted by Jong Hee-soo's warm smile. She asked what he was thinking about. Tae-soo smiled back and said he was just watching the clouds drift by. After a moment, he realized that maybe Mi-ae had been right. Even rivers and mountains change over time, so how could people stay the same? The time they spent together and the time they spent apart weren't so different after all. Hee-soo looked stunning. Smiling sweetly as always, she asked if everything was okay. Tae-soo's heart started to race. He knew that right now there was only one girl in his heart, and his one goal was to confess to Hee-soo before she graduated. Clearing his throat, he told her everything was fine, then added that she'd picked the perfect spot for this year's trip. She beamed with pride. She really had worked hard to organize it. As they walked to the car, chatting about random things, Tae-soo thought about Mi-ae's return and realized it didn't change a thing. His heart didn't skip a beat when he saw her. But then their peaceful moment was interrupted by Mi-ae, fully geared up like a hockey player, ready to hit the road again. Hee-soo laughed awkwardly and asked Tae-soo if her driving was really that bad. But he just slipped on his helmet and said, "Not at all." By noon, everyone had finally arrived at the rented country house. Mi-ae dropped her bags and immediately flopped onto the bed. Her roommates whispered that the poor freshman must have suffered through Hee-soo's driving. Meanwhile, Tae-soo was helping unload boxes when someone nervously poked him to get his attention. It was a freshman, Shida-bin. She smiled shyly and asked if he could give her a hand for a moment. By the end of the day, everyone was exhausted but happy to finally relax. Hee-soo cheerfully raised her can of beer and announced that the freshman trip had officially begun. The organizers had mixed everyone into groups of 6, pairing freshmen with upperclassmen to help them get to know each other. Everyone was having fun, except Tae-soo, who couldn't care less, and Ha-yoon, who was clearly jealous of every girl around him. Unfortunately, Mi-ae was also assigned to their group. She asked if she could switch with someone, but Hee-soo said changes weren't allowed until an hour later. Tae-soo quickly noticed that, unlike the other groups, his was made up entirely of girls. And he was the only guy. Naturally, every other guy in the room was glaring at him, wondering how he'd gotten so lucky to be surrounded by all the campus beauties. But Tae-soo wasn't even enjoying it. On one side, Da-bin kept begging him to drink with her, and on the other, Ha-yoon guarded him like a watchdog. Then he noticed something. Mia was drinking alcohol. Feeling his gaze, she frowned and asked, "What? You want me to toast with you every time I take a sip or something?" He said that wasn't it. He didn't even understand why he was feeling this strange concern for her. One thing was clear. This trip was going to be long and exhausting. This year, there were way more people on the trip, and the reason was obvious. The new freshman influencers. One of them, Ha Yun-ji, was a study vlogger and streamer. She'd started streaming back in 9th grade and now had over 40,000 subscribers. Another was Do Yeon-woo, who hosted a late-night radio show where she told scary stories. Maybe it was her pale skin and husky voice, but listeners loved her. As for Shi Da-bin, Tae-soo honestly had no idea who she was, or if he should know. That's when Yoonji excitedly announced that Da-bin ran a channel called A Day of Fun with Da-bin, and that she was a super popular gaming YouTuber with nearly 320,000 subscribers. Da-bin blushed, but was clearly happy that people recognized her, even though she'd just started college. The girls kept bombarding Tae-soo with questions, but he couldn't relax, not with all the jealous stares coming from the other guys. Then, out of nowhere, Da-bin's eyes lit up. "Wait, you play games too? Don't tell me you play Gukbap Bapstery." She could hardly believe it. She'd been playing that game since elementary school, and when she found out Tae-soo played on the same server, she almost jumped for joy. Then Tae-soo casually looked over at Mia and said, "You play on that server too, right?" Mia nearly spit out her drink. They'd agreed to pretend not to know each other. She forced a smile and acted clueless, asking if they were talking about some part-time job or something. But Da-bin was too excited to notice. She started ranting about a player everyone called the annoying gold farmer, a total menace who ruined the fun for everyone else. Without hesitation, Tae-soo pointed at himself and said, "That's me." Later, Da-bin was washing her hands in the bathroom, still in disbelief. She should have guessed that the annoying gold farmer was him. His username even had his real name in it. Yeon-woo, standing nearby, asked why she'd been looking for him anyway. What had he done? Da-bin suddenly remembered their emotional goodbye with their guild master. After her fight with Tae-soo, the master had to quit the game to earn money, to pay Tae-soo the compensation he'd demanded. If it weren't for him, she and the master would have beaten the final boss together. She was furious. Yeon-woo asked if she was planning to get revenge. But to her surprise, Da-bin turned to her with sparkling eyes and said she planned to seduce him instead, and she was sure it wouldn't be hard. In her mind, it was like something straight out of a manga or romantic drama. They met at college. He's a senior, she's a freshman. Neither of them knows they're sworn enemies. And despite everything, his heart starts to burn with love for her. Then, right when he finally confesses his feelings, she crushes his heart like an empty soda can under her heel. Da-bin laughed like a true villainess, saying, "Isn't that brilliant?" Breaking his heart the moment he confesses? But Yeon-woo sighed and said her brain was full of flowers instead of thoughts. Finally, they stepped outside. Da-bin complained that because there were too many people in the house, she had to use the outdoor toilet, and now she was freezing. She kept grumbling about how unfair it was, until suddenly 3 huge men appeared in front of her. A few moments later, Yeon-woo came running toward the group, shouting for help. She was panicking, screaming that Da-bin was in trouble. But things weren't nearly as bad as they sounded. Turns out, she'd just been ambushed by members of the university wrestling team who happened to be her huge fans. They were thrilled to meet their idol in person. Once everyone realized it wasn't serious, they all laughed it off, calling it an unplanned fan meet. When the news spread, more students decided to join in, running all over the place. So Hee-soo asked Tae-soo and Ha-yoon to help keep things under control. Tae-soo was just about to head outside when Mie suddenly stopped him and asked him not to go. He frowned, confused, and asked what was wrong. Mie looked serious and said there was a big problem in the girls' room. A few minutes later, she led him there but told him to keep quiet. No one could know he'd been inside. Then she pointed toward an outlet with an adapter plugged into it. Tae-soo blinked, unsure what she meant. Mie typed a short message on her phone screen. "It's a hidden camera." He nearly shouted in shock, but she quickly shushed him. Once they stepped back outside, Tae-soo finally asked how she even figured it out. Mie said it wasn't hard. One look at the outlet and she could tell something was off. She'd seen setups like that before. Then she turned to him and said the real question wasn't what it was, but who installed it, when, and why. Looking at her now, Tae-soo caught a glimpse of the Mie he'd known back in school. Curious, intense, and completely absorbed in everything around her. He remembered all those days they'd spent in the library together, reading books and debating questions about life and people. She was always full of questions, always trying to understand what drove people to do what they did. Even when he corrected her or said she was wrong, she'd just laugh and say, "My mouth's faster than my thoughts." When she noticed him staring at her, Mie blushed and awkwardly asked why he was looking at her like that. He cleared his throat and said it just felt weird and kind of awkward, that she'd asked him for help. After how harshly she'd talked to him earlier in the lounge, she must have been desperate to call him now. Mie turned red and quickly apologized, saying she only did it because she didn't know anyone else here. He was the only person she could trust with something like this. Finally, she said she'd just talk to him normally from now on. She needed his help. Even though it was awkward after what she'd said before, she felt she could rely on him. Taesu smiled and asked if she still planned to pretend they didn't know each other. Mie bumped her fist against his and said she genuinely needed his help, and she wasn't planning to avoid him anymore. In that moment, Taesu felt like the real Mie he'd known was finally back. They stopped by a vending machine, and Taesu suggested maybe the landlord had installed the camera. But Mie dismissed that theory, explaining she'd checked the other girls' rooms, and only theirs had one. She also ruled out the male students. Hee-soo, the student council president, had assigned night patrols specifically to make sure no guys entered the girls' rooms. Then Mie added that right after they'd arrived, she hadn't been feeling well and went straight to her room to lie down. She remembered clearly that the outlet hadn't looked strange back then, and she'd first noticed the change right before the group meeting, meaning only the 3 girls sharing the room with her could have installed it. That put Shi Da-bin, Ha Yoon-ji, and Do Yeon-woo, or someone close to them, under suspicion. Taesu thought that if Mie was right, it meant the culprit was one of their own. Someone from their department acting with bad intentions. Mie asked him not to tell anyone just yet. They didn't know who did it, or why. If they told everyone now, innocent people might get blamed. Then Taesu asked why she wanted to tell Hee-soo specifically. Mie gave him a curious look and asked if he was, by any chance, in love with the student council president. Taesu instantly froze, flustered. He didn't want to talk about his feelings, so he pretended not to understand what she meant. Mie smiled knowingly and said, "You can play dumb all you want. It's obvious." Suddenly, Ha-yoon jumped out from behind the bushes, scaring them half to death. She looked completely drunk, slurring that she'd finally found them. Taesu asked why she was drinking and where the wrestling team guys went. She said they were annoying, so she threw them out. Fists. Then Ha-yoon staggered toward Mie, demanding to know what her problem was. Wasn't she the one who'd said getting into the same university was just a coincidence? And living near Taesu too? Ha-yoon knew Mie had asked Taesu to pretend they didn't know each other, so why was she calling him out here at night all alone? Tears streamed down Ha-yoon's face as she called Mie a liar. "You said there's nothing between you and Taesu. But look at you now," she cried. "Do you have any idea how much this hurts?" Then she broke down completely, pounding her fists on the ground and shouting about how unfair it all was. In the end, Taesu had to carry the drunk Ha-yoon back to her room. He and Mia decided to keep the hidden camera incident secret, at least until they could talk to Hee-soo. They agreed to meet her in the morning and start investigating. That's how the first day of their trip ended, but the next morning brought something unexpected. When Taesu woke up and stepped into the common room, he saw everyone gathered together, buzzing with tension. Ha-yoon-ji was pointing angrily at Mie, shouting that she'd seen it with her own eyes, accusing Mie of planting the hidden camera in their room. Jung Hee-soo tried to calm everyone down, saying they needed to understand what really happened before blaming anyone. Taesu and Ha-yoon stood among the crowd of students, listening to the frantic whispers about what was going on. The girl pressed up against her friend, looking confused, and asked what they were talking about. "What do you mean, a hidden camera? Were we being filmed?" The guy put a reassuring hand on her shoulder and smiled, telling her not to worry. Mie would never do something like that. Meanwhile, Mie stood calmly, watching Ha-yoon-ji, thinking she hadn't expected the girl to lash out with accusations like that. The girl standing across from her clenched her fists and gritted her teeth. She was the one who had actually installed the hidden camera. Taesu knew the truth. He mouthed to Mie that he'd stand up for her if things got out of hand, but she quietly signaled that she had everything under control. She looked tense. Last night, she had chosen to trust this guy, and more than that, he'd been clever enough to come up with a solid plan. He'd suggested that if they started openly interrogating the girls, the real culprit might slip away. It would be smarter to make the guilty one reveal herself. Mie had raised an eyebrow and asked what exactly he meant. How was he planning to make her confess? Instead of answering, Taisu smirked and asked, "When do you think people usually let their guard down the most?" Mie didn't get the riddle, so he answered it himself. Early in the morning, right after they wake up. If someone sleeps well, they're relaxed in the morning. And that's when their guard drops. Mie froze for a second. She always knew he was smart, but this plan was actually brilliant. She'd snatched the camera early in the morning, forcing the culprit to come to them to get it back. At that moment, the only people who knew what was going on were Taisu, Jung Hee-soo, and Chan Mie. And the fact that Yoonji was now accusing Mie out loud made it clear. The culprit was definitely her. It was a surprise, but it all made sense. Yoonji turned to the other girls, insisting they'd seen Mie installing the camera too. Shadabin replied that Mie had been acting weird that morning and had slipped something into her pocket, but she didn't think it was a hidden camera. Taesu stood silently, watching everything unfold. He'd thought the culprit would quietly come to them, not publicly accuse an innocent girl. Should he speak up now or wait? Would stepping in just make things worse? Mie, meanwhile, pretended to be completely clueless. She smiled sweetly and said that if this was what it was about, she had an answer. Then she pulled a toothbrush out of her pocket, shocking Yoonji, who had assumed it was the camera. Mie smirked and asked, "Why would you even think I was hiding some kind of camera?" But Yoonji didn't back down. She started shouting that she'd overheard Mie on the phone, bragging about living with celebrities and saying she was going to send out a video of them. Mie stayed calm and, with a small smile, held out her phone. She said she was willing to let Yoonji check everything, calls, photos, vidas texts. Yoonji could go through it all looking for proof. But if she found nothing, she'd have to apologize to Mie publicly. That completely threw Yoonji off. She knew she wouldn't find a thing. Mie even dumped out her entire bag on the table, her expression perfectly calm, saying she had nothing to hide. Other students began murmuring that maybe Mie didn't need to go that far. Many of them didn't believe she was capable of something so low as secretly filming anyone. But Mie just said she didn't want any misunderstandings. She'd do whatever it took to prove her innocence. Yoonji was sweating, panicking, not knowing what to say next to retrieve her hidden camera. Taesu was sure now it was over. The culprit had to be one of Mie's roommates. Otherwise, installing a camera in their room would have been too risky. If they'd tried to catch her openly, she would have just fled. So the best move was to make her expose herself. Yoonji's mind was racing. Then she suddenly smirked. Like someone losing her grip, she pointed at Mie and yelled that they hadn't checked everything. She claimed Mie could have hidden the camera on her body. Maybe she'd shown them her phone and bag on purpose to throw them off. So Mia needed to strip down. Mie stayed perfectly composed. She slowly took off her glasses and asked, "Are you really willing to go that far? Can't you just apologize and admit you were wrong?" Her gaze was sharp, her smile predatory. She told Yoonji this was her last chance to own up and end this peacefully. Taesu could tell Mia was genuinely angry now, and when she was like that, she was capable of anything. He tried to stop her, but then he froze, because nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. Mie dropped her glasses on the floor, then her jacket, and started pulling off her sweater right in front of everyone. She finally stood there in just a sports top, one hand on her hip, smirking. "What now?" she asked. "Where do you think I hid the camera?" Mie didn't seem like she was planning to stop. She reached up, pulled out her hair tie, letting her long, glossy hair fall loose, and asked mockingly if Yoonji thought the camera was hidden in her hair. Then she stepped closer, leaned in and whispered, "What do you think I should do next? Take off everything?" Yoonji froze, realizing she'd lost. Tears welled up in Yoonji's eyes, pure frustration and shame. Finally, Taesu and Heesu draped a jacket over Mie's shoulders. It was over. Taesu blushed, clearly worried for her. He asked softly, "Did you really have to take it that far?" They searched the entire cottage, but found no camera, so Yoonji had to publicly apologize to Mie. Heesu suggested everyone just forget what happened, since things ended well. She assured the restless students that it was a false accusation and Mie had accepted the apology. So that was that. The whole situation could have blown up even more, but Mie chose to let it rest. Suddenly, she turned to the student council president and asked if she could speak with Yoonji alone. She promised she wouldn't hurt her. She'd already forgiven her. Still, Yoonji looked terrified by the idea. Mie reassured her. If they left things as they were, it would stay awkward between them. So, she said, Yoonji should buy her a drink and they could talk it out. In the end, the two girls sat outside, and Mie said directly that she was now ready to hear the real explanation from the culprit herself. She placed the very same outlet with the hidden camera in front of Yoonji's face and calmly asked what her reason had been for installing it in their room. Yoonji was surprised to see that Tae-soo had it, since she was sure Mie had taken it. But to her shock, Na Ha-yoon suddenly appeared and said that the outlet with the camera had been with her the whole time. In reality, Mie never had the camera. She only created the illusion that she did. According to Tae-soo's plan, Ha-yoon told the girls that Jong Hee-soo was calling for them. The goal was to make sure the room would be empty. Then, at his request, she took the extension cord with the outlet, but she had no idea a camera was hidden inside. She was puzzled as to why he wanted her to steal something like that from the girls' room. That was a complete surprise to Yoonji, since the camera had gone missing right after she woke up, and then the student council president called her away before she could figure out what happened. Later, it turned out that Mie didn't have it either. Even though Yoonji tried not to look suspicious, Mie noticed that she was the only one among the three girls who paid attention to the outlet, which gave her away. To top it off, Tae-soo announced that they had checked the memory card from the camera. The very first clip showed Yoonji installing it, but that wasn't what caught their attention. As they reviewed the footage, they realized that the camera had been pointed only at the girls' luggage and hadn't recorded anyone. When Yoonji heard they had undeniable proof of her guilt, she burst into tears and said she would confess everything. She hadn't meant any harm. Because of her fame, her belongings were often stolen or broken, and she suffered from anxiety. So she always took a camera on group trips for her own safety. When she realized the camera was missing, most likely taken by Mie, she panicked since she hadn't deleted any data from it. She panicked because she feared Mie could use the footage to blackmail her. No one would believe that Yoonji had installed the camera without bad intentions, and everything she had worked for over the years would vanish. Now she cried, admitting that fear had clouded her judgment. Suddenly, Mie stood up and said she had suspected something like this, because if Yoonji had malicious motives, she wouldn't have recorded only their belongings. Tae-soo realized in surprise that Mie had probably suspected as much from the beginning, which was why she came to him first instead of calling the police. Mie looked at Yoonji seriously and said she believed her. But Yoonji couldn't believe that Mie would just trust and forgive her so easily. Mie replied that it was fine. She had only wanted to know why Yoonji installed the camera, and now she had her answer. She assured Yoonji that she didn't want to ruin the department's atmosphere at the start of the semester, and that they would still keep the evidence, just in case Yoonji was lying and something else happened. Meanwhile, Ha-yoon whispered to Tae-soo that she hardly recognized Mie anymore. It felt like she'd become a completely different person. Tae-soo suddenly remembered how Mie had thanked him the night before for believing in her and agreeing to help. Considering how she had treated him before, he could have easily ignored her. In the end, the commotion finally died down, and everyone decided not to spread the story to anyone who hadn't been involved. The only thing Yoonji insisted on was confessing everything to the girls she shared a room with. She explained everything to them, and to her surprise, they understood and believed her. They even felt sorry for her, but more than that, they apologized to Mie for having suspected her. Mie stretched contentedly, smiled, and thanked Tae-soo for his help, saying she hadn't expected him to be that clever. But suddenly, Tae-soo asked if she was really okay. After all, everyone had seen her nearly half naked. Wouldn't she feel embarrassed in front of her classmates now? Mie replied that she had been furious and had no choice. Besides, she wasn't the kind of girl he might think she was. Blushing to the roots of her hair, she said she wasn't the type who could just strip anywhere, anytime. But Tae-soo asked what she would have done if Yoonji had kept lying. Mie calmly explained that of course she would have called the police, but she was sure Yoonji would have broken down anyway. She had just panicked and done what she thought she had to. Now, all Mie dreamed of was finishing university quietly and staying out of trouble. Tae-soo wasn't sure he'd heard her right. Did she really think her campus life would stay calm and peaceful after what she'd done? At that moment, they returned to the common lounge. Mie stopped, realizing exactly where her plan had gone wrong. A whole crowd of students stood before her, excitedly surrounding her, taking pictures and asking to talk. The girls asked why she had been hiding the fact that she was actually so beautiful. After the show she'd caused, and without her glasses, Mia realized her impulsive actions had made her the center of attention in the department. The senior girls were thrilled. They offered to help her choose clothes that suited her great figure and to teach her how to do makeup. From that moment on, Maya definitely became a memorable figure in their department thanks to her eccentric behavior. Later that night, Yoonji got drunk and, using a bottle and a spoon as a makeshift microphone, started singing to lift everyone's spirits after, in her opinion, she had ruined the mood. Her classmates cheered her on and whistled playfully. Everyone was having fun, and it seemed the trip was going smoothly. Sue was also pleased and told Taesu with relief that she was glad everything had ended well. Mai A, who had been at the center of the morning's incident, was now surrounded by senior girls eager to befriend her. But then Taesu suddenly remembered that he had come on this trip to spend time alone with Sue and finally confess his feelings to her. He had even taken days off work for it. Suddenly, one of the students said the drinks were finished and someone needed to go to the store. Sue was surprised, and Taesu thought this might be his chance to go with her. But she immediately crushed his plan, saying that as the student council president, she was responsible, and leaving now wasn't a good idea, so she asked him to go to the store alone. Still, he didn't want to go by himself, so he looked around for someone to join him. His friends were too busy competing over who could drink more. Not an option. Hayun was also drunk almost to the point of passing out, so he decided not to bother her either. In the end, he decided it was better to just go alone. As he stepped outside, Taesu couldn't stop thinking about what was going on with Mie. It was the first time he'd seen her in 5 years, so of course she looked different. But what really bothered him was how much she knew about that camera in the outlet, and how she brushed it off like it was nothing worth mentioning. What had happened to her over the years that she could stay so calm in a situation like that? Had she been involved in something dangerous? But suddenly, all those thoughts vanished, and he froze in place. A short distance away stood Mie. Her eyes were closed, her face tilted toward the cool night air, her hair softly fluttering in the breeze. When he called her name, she immediately opened her eyes and turned toward the sound. Then, in a completely unexpected move, she just started running away. Unfortunately, she tripped and fell. Taesu quickly reached out his hand to help her up. The girl looked shocked, like she'd seen a ghost. Her face turned bright red, and she asked if he could please pretend he hadn't seen her there. Later, she learned that he had simply been on his way to the store. She explained that she was afraid the upperclassmen had sent him to find her. The thought alone made her shiver. Even though all the attention had been exhausting, she said everyone in their class seemed like good people, and she even worried whether she'd be able to make friends with them. Taesu honestly didn't think it was possible, but somehow they'd ended up in a place that looked just like the spot they used to visit all the time. Behind their old school was a hillside they used to climb after classes, and he never thought he'd get another chance to walk there, much less enjoy the view with Mie again. Back in school, they used to bring stacks of library books and stay there reading until sunset. Mie had even cried once while lying on his lap, when the main character of a novel died. Taesu had laughed so hard back then. Her tears and snot had stained his pants. It was one of the few school memories filled with genuine happiness. Mie listened to him and said he'd really changed a lot. Carrying full bags of snacks and drinks, he replied that people can't stay the same forever. Suddenly, he stopped and said that since they were no longer kids, and now studying together in college, they should apologize to each other and clear up their misunderstandings. Mie listened carefully, then smiled and said she'd wanted to keep her distance because she thought it would be better for both of them. She apologized if she had seemed rude. Taesu was genuinely surprised and asked what she meant by that. She explained that on the very first day of university, she had already told him it wasn't his fault. She'd just hoped they could pretend to be strangers. She gave a small laugh and said that despite her intentions, they just kept running into each other anyway. So she apologized for how she had acted toward him at the police station and on the first day of classes. Things weren't supposed to go that way. She admitted she didn't want to talk about the past because she'd been going through a difficult time back then. But since they clearly couldn't avoid each other, they might as well get along. Besides, she added lightly, once she graduates, she plans to disappear. So he probably won't see her again anyway. Finally, she cheerfully walked ahead and said they should hurry back since everyone was probably waiting for them. Taesu realized there was nothing more he could say. If he pushed her, he might unintentionally reopen old wounds. And then she could vanish again, just as suddenly as she did that day. He was about to say something else when the door to the house swung open, and Sue happily exclaimed that they were finally back. The student council president urged them to come in quickly. Everyone was demanding more drinks. Taesu sighed heavily, thinking maybe it was for the best. Mie just wanted to graduate peacefully, and there would be time to talk later. And so their trip came to an end, full of events, leaving behind plenty of new mysteries. But just when he thought everything was over, something interesting happened on the way back. Taesu had his hands braced on either side of Hisu against the hood of the car. Their eyes locked. Their faces were so close their breaths almost mixed together. The MT lasted 3 days, and during all that time, it was the first time Taesu managed to be alone with Hisu. Just the two of them. The girl looked at him, flustered and confused. But things weren't as sweet as they seemed. From the back seat, Mie's voice broke the silence. She cleared her throat and said that if the car was fine, they could just keep driving because she really wanted to get home as soon as possible. Ha-yoon, who had insisted on coming along this time, chimed in and said the car seemed to be working fine. The thing was, they had hit a small rock and it bounced off, cracking the windshield. Taesu and Hisu got out to check if everything was okay, but Taesu tripped and fell right onto Hisu, pressing her against the hood. Now both of them were awkwardly embarrassed. Mi-ai quietly muttered that it would have been better to just take the bus instead of watching how clumsy Taesu was. But for some reason, Ha-yoon was sure that Mi-ai had refused to take the bus on purpose, because she had feelings for Taesu. She even asked her again about it, which left Mi-ai speechless. Yet, the way Ha-yoon got all cute and jealous over Taesu made Mi-ai wrap her arms around her. She gave her a quick peck on the cheek just so she wouldn't feel upset. Then she reassured her, saying she didn't have any feelings for the guy and that getting into the same university really was just a coincidence. She had only dated Taesu briefly back in middle school. It had been 5 whole years since then, and she didn't feel anything romantic toward him anymore. Ha-yoon was relieved to hear that, but still stayed a little cautious. Then, Mi-ai leaned closer and asked if Ha-yoon would believe her if she said she'd help her start dating Taesu. Ha-yoon blushed at the very thought of it. She couldn't believe Mi-ai would actually help her. Mi-ai said, of course she would. She wasn't trying to lie or trick her. But something still bothered her. Did Taesu really not realize that Ha-yoon liked him? Judging by the way everyone around them acted, it seemed obvious. So had Ha-yoon never once tried to confess her feelings to him? Ha-yoon blushed and admitted that Taesu used to be her tutor back in elementary school. So maybe that's why he only saw her as a little sister. But Mi-ai laughed and said Taesu was just slow on the uptake. The girl just needed to confess to him. And if he didn't get it the 10th time, then she'd better go for the 100th. Then Mi-ai pointed toward Taesu and Hisu, who were standing outside. It was obvious there was some romantic tension between them. Mi-ai said the first thing they had to take care of was making sure Taesu didn't start dating the student council president. Soon the new semester began, and Taesu had no idea about the conversation that had taken place in the car on their way home. After that trip, Mi-ai suddenly became the center of attention among their classmates. Taesu actually felt a bit sorry for her. Knowing she was an introvert, he could imagine how tough it must have been for her to handle all that attention. After the hidden camera incident, Ha-yoon-ji became Mi-ai's biggest fan and followed her everywhere. Mi-ai herself stopped hiding behind her glasses and dull clothes. When Taesu asked what caused her sudden image change, she confessed that some upper-class girls had threatened to wait outside her house and help her dress better if she didn't start doing it herself. At the same time, for some reason, Ha-yoon started hanging around him a lot more often. This time, the girl hugged him and asked if he wanted to go see the blossoms together. She was always energetic. But why was she so forward now? Then suddenly, Taesu realized what she'd just said, and an idea popped into his head. A brand new business plan. So instead of admiring the cherry blossoms together, Taesu made Ha-yoon help him set up an instant photo booth service under the blooming trees. Ha-yoon awkwardly tried to tell him that when she'd invited him to see the blossoms, she meant something a bit different. But Taesu just smiled and showed her the camera he'd won at a photography club event. He'd also won 30 rolls of film, but almost forgot about them after realizing the camera wasn't worth much when he tried to sell it. Now, thanks to Ha-yoon, he remembered and came up with a plan to make some cash. The girl was a little disappointed, but still happy. After all, in a way, they were watching the blossoms together. She'd known exactly what kind of person he was when she fell for him. So she decided to help him earn money and hoped that if they finished early, they'd have time to be alone. She stood up and started calling people over to take pictures. She remembered Mi-ai's words, "Don't stop at 10 times or even 100." And it only made her more confident and determined. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice. It was Da-bin, smiling as she asked if she could take a photo with someone. Taesu picked up the camera and said he was ready to take pictures. Da-bin didn't plan to stop at just one shot. She posed alone first, then called her friends over. The group photo turned out especially beautiful since it included almost all the first-year girls from their department. Da-bin was genuinely surprised by how good the photos came out and praised Taesu, saying he had a real talent for photography. When he replied that he just took the pictures, and maybe it was because of the great models, Da-bin winked and asked if he was flirting with her right now. Watching how openly Da-bin flirted with Tae-soo, Ha-yoon felt her plans slipping away and quickly suggested that she and Tae-soo take a walk, just the two of them. Then Mi-ae came to the rescue. She put an arm around Da-bin and said she suddenly had a huge craving for milk tea and cake. Da-bin tried to get out of it, saying she was a little busy, but Mi-ae insisted that Da-bin had promised to treat her. "Or are you saying you were lying to me?" she teased. She made it very clear she wasn't about to give up her tea and cake now. In the end, the girls left, leaving Ha-yoon and Tae-soo alone together. As she walked away, Mi-ah turned back and winked at Ha-yoon, encouraging her to take action and believe in herself. Ha-yoon finally realized what Mi-ae had just done for her and almost teared up from gratitude. Gathering her courage, she looked at Tae-soo and asked if they could use the remaining film just for the two of them, to make some memories together. But right at that moment, out of nowhere, Jang Hee-soo appeared. She waved at them, and the moment Ha-yoon saw her, she could practically hear her plan shattering into pieces. Smiling, Hee-soo said she'd heard they were taking photos under the cherry blossoms, so she'd brought almost the whole department along. Turned out there were tons of people who wanted pictures. Tae-soo, who had already mentally calculated how much he could make from this, gave her a thumbs up and said she could count on him. In the end, Ha-yoon had to enjoy the cherry blossoms with the entire department. The next day, Tae-soo was walking home late after his part-time job when he stopped. He'd spotted a familiar figure. Mi-ae was taking pictures of a blooming tree with her phone, looking beautiful and genuinely happy. He couldn't understand why he'd run into her here of all places. This path was famously known as the Lover's Corner. Today, she looked even more stunning than usual, and he wondered if maybe she was meeting someone. But after watching her from a distance for a bit, he realized he was probably wrong. She didn't seem to be waiting for anyone. She was just taking selfies with the cherry blossoms. Ever since the start of the semester, Tae-soo had been surprised at how Mi-ah had become somewhat of a campus model. Everyone admired her. All the guys in his class were completely taken by her and constantly read online posts and discussions about her. But it wasn't just her stylish looks. She was genuinely charming. And even now, every guy walking by couldn't help but stare. Tae-soo noted to himself that ever since that night on the trip and their conversation, Mi-ae really had stopped avoiding him. Not that they were close, but she always greeted him. Seeing his hesitation, the girl once reminded him that they'd agreed not to ignore each other, since they'd be studying together, and she hoped things between them were fine. Now he stood there wondering if he should walk up and say hi since he'd already seen her. But then he remembered, every time they met, things somehow got weird. So maybe it'd be better to just head home and farm some gold in his game instead. Just as he decided to walk away, two guys approached Mi-ae. Tae-soo decided to wait a bit, just to make sure they were her friends. But then he heard her firmly turning them down, saying she already had someone with her. That made Tae-soo uneasy. Did she not even know those guys? The two didn't seem to take the hint and kept insisting that Mi-ae join them for drinks. Tae-soo was about to step in, but then remembered how that usually ended. Mi-ah didn't take kindly to unwanted help. And what if she really was here with someone? But before he could figure it out, Mi-ae walked straight up to him, nudged him in the ribs, and told the annoying guys she was here on a date with him. Then she leaned into him, blushing, and added that their relationship was still in the early stages, so the guys shouldn't bother them. Tae-soo just froze, staring at her in shock. What was she doing? Mi-ae winked at him and whispered for him to play along, but Tae-soo couldn't wrap his head around how she could just blurt out something like that. The two guys stood there, confused, eyeing the pair and asking if that was really true. Tae-soo tensed up and quietly apologized to Mi-ah. He needed to warn her about something. Still acting like the doting girlfriend, she smiled sweetly and asked, "What's wrong, honey?" But before he could answer, the guys smirked and asked, "Wait, for real? Tae-soo, you two are dating?" Tae-soo sighed, covering his face with one hand, and explained to Mi-ae that these guys were his sunbae from one of his part-time jobs. Mi-ae turned bright red and yelled, "Are you kidding me? Again?" Just then, Yoonji happened to walk by with an ice cream and caught the hilarious sight of Mi-ae smacking Tae-soo and demanding he explain everything to his friends. A little later, one of his sunbae, Go Dong-soo, pulled out his phone and told them to smile for the camera. Mi-ae tried to run off. She wanted no part of that. But Ma Dae-ho caught her and said she had to stand closer to Tae-soo since they were just starting their relationship. The girl blushed even harder and shouted that she'd already explained they weren't a couple at all. They just knew each other from school. She'd thought she was in danger earlier and had just wanted to avoid trouble. But Ma Deho just grinned and didn't believe her. He said she could say whatever she wanted, but she was still standing next to Taesu for the photo. Suddenly, she felt Taesu grab her hand and pull her closer, saying there was no point arguing with them. He told her these guys were just in their spring mood, and that no matter what she said, they'd twist it into something romantic, so it'd be easier to just take the photo and get it over with. The guys grinned as they snapped pictures of the couple. Mi-ae admitted that might actually be the fastest way out, so she agreed to take a few photos, though she felt completely embarrassed. Finally, they stood side by side, holding hands, looking like a real couple on a date. That day, they took their very first photo together. Spring. The season when the trees bloom and love fills the air. On campus, all anyone talked about were dates and relationships. Taesu went to the media department's student council room and found his classmates sitting in the dark, looking miserable. He asked why they were sitting there on such a beautiful day, and they replied they had nowhere else to go, then asked if Taesu could introduce them to someone. He was genuinely shocked. They knew he didn't even have a girlfriend. Honestly, there were tons of guys in their department suffering from spring fever. Since a lot of cute freshmen had joined this year, attendance at events and parties had skyrocketed by 99%. But as always, whenever there's a big crowd, a few people end up ruining it for everyone. The girls started complaining to the student council president that too many guys were acting pushy, which made them avoid attending group events altogether. As a result, Jung Hee-soo banned all group parties, especially any that involved alcohol. She scolded the guys for inappropriate behavior. She understood that everyone wanted a little romance and connection in spring, but said the guys needed to control themselves. Taesu couldn't understand why everyone was so obsessed with this spring fever. His friends got mad, saying he was just heartless and didn't get dating at all. But that wasn't true. He liked someone too. He'd dreamed of going on dates with Hee-soo. He just tried to keep it to himself. Then, out of nowhere, he thought about Mi-ae, about how good things had been between them once. His face turned red and he couldn't believe he was thinking about her that way. Why did she suddenly pop into his head? Maybe it was because of that park incident the other day? She had said she'd pay him back somehow. But what did she mean by that? Suddenly, one of his friends asked if it was true that he wasn't dating Na Ha-yoon, and Taesu rolled his eyes, saying he was tired of answering that same question over and over. The guy said he only asked because he'd heard some other guy from another department had confessed to her. Meanwhile, Ha-yoon was in her room, looking at a photo she'd taken with Taesu and Hee-soo under the cherry blossoms. Suddenly, her roommate caught her and started teasing, asking if she ever got tired of staring at that photo, and if she'd just been about to kiss Taesu's picture. Ha-yoon blushed bright red and yelled that Park-yoon was out of her mind for even thinking that. Her roommate just waved it off and said something was clearly wrong with Ha-yoon if she'd turned down another guy again. She asked how many guys she'd rejected already. 10? 12? Ha-yoon tried to defend herself, saying she barely even knew them. Park-yoon knew her roommate was hopelessly in love with Taesu, but thought she should give someone else, someone better, a chance. But Ha-yoon smiled and said, "There's no one better than Oppa Taesu." She wanted to tell her once again the story of how she'd fallen for Taesu back in elementary school. But Park-yoon groaned, saying she was sick to death of that story and that Ha-yoon needed to take off her rose-colored glasses. Then she showed her Shida-bin's podcast on her phone and asked, "Are you really okay with this?" That Da-bin girl's hunting Taesu like a sly fox. But Ha-yoon replied calmly that Da-bin didn't worry her. Appa hadn't even exchanged more than a couple of glances with her. She said she knew Taesu well enough by now. If his eyes ever landed on someone, he couldn't look away. And she remembered exactly how he'd looked at Jung Hee-soo during the cherry blossom season. The girl's expression instantly turned sad, and she thought to herself that he really was an idiot. There was only one girl she'd ever truly been worried about. Meanwhile, Taesu stumbled upon a very interesting scene. Mi-ae and Hee-soo were chatting and laughing so hard they had tears in their eyes. Mi-ae was telling some funny story about him, and the girls agreed to keep talking later by meeting at the side gate. When they finally noticed him standing there, both smiled and greeted him. But Taesu just stood there, wondering why they had been talking about him in the first place. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this story and what manhwa you'd like to see next. See you in the next installment.